So we've come to the portion of our program that in my set list I wrote improv. And what does that mean? We're going to try some shit out. So I don't know what's going to happen now. Maybe you do. Okay, great. Good timing for this. So what do you want to know? Before I take what?
Chicago.
What about Chicago? Let's go. Great. All right. Thank you, Brian. Give it up for Brian. The Bulls? I don't know the Chicago Bulls monologue by heart, but I can improvise it. Or I was asked to just let's go on Chicago. So let's see what happens. Chicago. I think there's something significant about growing up on a lake or near one. We often think of the ocean as this massive body of water. And then rivers, these things that have a purpose and a direction and are going somewhere. The thing about a lake is that it gets the shit end of the stick as far as bodies of waters go, which is kind of how the Midwest experiences America, or someplace like Chicago, which is a really fascinating city. I think it's always important for me when I talk about Chicago to clarify to people that when you go to downtown Chicago, after the Blackhawks won, that's the Stanley Cup, right? That's the one that the hockey people win? Okay. After the Blackhawks won the Stanley Cup, the cleanliness in the city after the parade was spick and span. But did you know that that's not how the entire city of Chicago experiences their existence? Did you know that it's a completely divided city? Did you know that racism and poverty run rampant in a whole section of Chicago, but you wouldn't know that if you go down Michigan Avenue, and you wouldn't know that if you go up to the suburbs where I grew up, and you wouldn't know that if you go to the area where Cabrini Green used to be, because it does not look like that anymore. I feel very much like a New Yorker. My friend Kate told me I have to wait for another 5 years until it's been 15, and then we'll see if I'm an actual New Yorker. I'm so close, she says. Thank you. It's been 10 and a half years. And growing up wanting desperately to be the next Bette Midler and wanting desperately to be like a female Tom Wolfe and be on stage and write books and articles, New York was the only place I knew I was going to be. And so growing up in my living room, making up dances to Janet Jackson, lying on, I would move this purple chair out of the way in the living room and then put on Rhythm Nation or Janet in the Bang & Olufsen stereo that was flat against the wall. And when it would get to the throb track, what's that, 10 or 11 on Janet, I would put it on and run to the middle of the living room and lie on my back. I was 10, and I'd start gyrating my hips up and down, dun 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 dun, right? And then throb, come for me. And then on come for me, I'd lift up my body in a way that probably a 10 or 11-year-old, well, maybe they should know how to lift up that. They can do whatever the fuck they want with their body as long as it's consensual. And so here I was, an artist. I was destined to be in New York. And I grew up with this tension of nuance that I didn't quite understand until I went away. I left home when I was 17. I went to boarding school in Europe. And then I went to college at the University of Pennsylvania. I moved to Atlanta for 6 months to waitress at a sports bar, saved up my tip money during football season, drove around the United States by myself for several months, and then moved to New York. And so I never experienced Chicago as an adult. But once I experienced, or I've never experienced racism, but once I started to witness racial injustice and systemic oppression just by like living with a little bit wider eyes, especially in college when I started to see how gentrification worked and how poverty worked and how oppression worked and how racism worked just by like going to Penn. Like literally my first night of new student orientation, I went off campus with some folks to buy beer, and they said the most fucked up racist shit. And I that was when I realized that just because you're quote unquote smart academically doesn't mean you're smart enough to not be a fucking racist asshole, right? Like I didn't know that until that night. And so once I started to understand how these oppressions worked, then I started to realize that that's where I grew up. That I grew up in a very specific manicured version of Chicago. And that what is happening in Chicago, and that has always been happening in Chicago, is happening everywhere. It's just so separated in Chicago that folks really don't know. Like here in New York City, you just gotta walk a few blocks and the world shifts. You just gotta turn the corner and a few things shift. Also, the worst things that have ever happened to me in my entire life all happened in places of rich white privilege. So I also don't want to fucking hear about safety or bullshit things about like what's safe, what's not. It's all unsafe, frankly. And so when I think about Chicago, I am so grateful that that's where I grew up, that even though I have been growing myself into the artist I am and knew and hoped I might always become, there is still this great love and appreciation for having grown up next to the lake, having grown up next to this body of water that people don't think of as the ocean or the river going somewhere. There is a vastness, an expansiveness to Chicago. There is a direction that so many people in that city are going. There are folks doing incredible work to change the injustices that have been happening there systemically, institutionally for decades. And so when I think about Chicago, I think about the lake. Thank you.